It's called.
Oh, actually, oh, you're on. Okay, okay. You disappeared and said, "Oh, what happened?" Anthony Pienta, who is with the Philanthropy Roundtable, and who always brings a wonderful team with him. So, although I've said about 10 times already that I don't think money is our fundamental problem, it certainly is an issue that needs to be addressed and to be creative in our fundraising approaches. So you can only have so many bake sales to keep the thing going. And Anthony has some good creative ideas about how to approach this. So.
All right, thanks, Padre. Not backed by popular domain and backed by like the arm bar thing is how I would describe it. As Father mentioned, my name is Anthony Pienta. So I'm the director of the K-12 education programs at the Roundtable. We are a national network of about 650 donors, and a donor can be an individual, private family foundation, and a family. There's a number of entities, and our job is just to be a resource for them. Sometimes it's things like learning about a specific topic. We make a lot of introductions. We also put on programs. We also produce these guidebooks. So if you don't have one, I've got a few more. But this is kind of, at least on the Catholic education topic, this is a collection of our, it's kind of like my brain dump. Sorry if it is a lot to get through. But this is our sense that the Roundtable is a secular organization, a very friendly religion, but obviously a lot of our members are Catholic, have interest in Catholic schools. A lot of some of the donors we work with are not, that have an interest in Catholic schools are not Catholic. Their interest is more in terms of the value that Catholic schools bring to society, to offering parents good choices for even basic moral formation. We would say it's Catholic schools are one of the gems of the United States, of the free society that has developed. Couple things just quickly about myself. So I have 5 children. We sent our kids to a wonderful Catholic Montessori school. Interesting situation where I'm at outside of Washington, D.C. is my wife and I actually had 4 or 5 Catholic school options to choose from. Our actual parish is about 4,000 families. I think they said 16 or 17,000 parishioners. Very large, and ours is not the largest in the diocese. So there's this really interesting situation of this exploding Catholic population there. They can't build the churches fast enough. They certainly can't build the schools fast enough. My parish doesn't have a parish school. It's a new parish. So you're seeing these options just crop up. One is the Catholic Montessori school where we send our kids. There's also a classical school. There's a half day or a half week co-op where kids are in school two days a week, and it's a homeschool co-op the other 3 days. There's all kinds of options like that. So that kind of got me thinking that this is when you're looking at solutions to keeping Catholic schools open and finding new avenues to deliver excellent Catholic education. It helps with what Father said in terms of the creativity of what is the process of thinking through other means to the same end, to the same goal. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Before I was at the Roundtable, I was at the group called the Acting Institute in Michigan, and there I managed a thing called the Catholic High School Honor Roll. Every week we published a list of the top 50 Catholic high schools. That's how I met Father Peter through some of the early events of the Catholic Education Foundation. A couple goals of this discussion, getting at that creativity, it helps, especially when a lot of the initiatives happen, even like what Mary Pat was discussing at lunch. If you're going to do something with classical education, a major shift of some sort, philanthropy is oftentimes going to play a role. Even the fellows from Fall and River talking about some of the changes that have occurred in the diocese. There's actually a foundation that's funding a lot of those. The committee, the search that brought Steve Perla into the superintendency. A lot of those efforts, there's a foundation we work with that's part of that process. So what we want to do is say, let's get in the minds of how donors think, so that you know whether, regardless of your role, what is the right way to engage with funders, be they individuals or foundations and staffs. And then to that extent, what sort of things would our donors interested in? What sort of things drive them nuts? How can you have good relationships, and how can that be something that builds on opportunities for the future? We'll get into a few of those things. Obviously, I mentioned resource. Let me stop there. Introduce Amy, and we'll get into it. So one of the Philanthropy Roundtable is a long-standing relationship with the William E. Simon Foundation. I met Amy, I think, five years ago, since we started the foundation. And they've been big supporters of Catholic education, as well as I think you guys supported this background, if I'm not mistaken. So proper credit where it's due. And have been on, I feel, among the leading foundations giving to Catholic schools located in New York City. There's a focus on New York, and occasional things that are national that still impact those regions. So let me stop there. Amy, tell us about yourself and tell us about the foundation.
Sure. Hi, I'm Amy Allred. Thank you for having me. I work for the William E. Simon Foundation. I'm a program officer there. How did I come to work there? Sort of a roundabout way. Previous to the work at the Simon Foundation, I was working for a political magazine, National Review. And so being there, it was conservative ideas being spoken about. Bill Buckley, if you're familiar with him, he was a Catholic himself. I'm Catholic. So the whole worldview was similar to my own, and so it was a great place to work. However, it was sort of more theoretical. We talked about policy prescriptions that may never actually come to be, and we're thinking about it intellectually, which is great. We need people to do that. But I wanted to be a little bit more hands-on and be able to be in the field and work in those areas of policy that interested me the most. So actually, one of the Simon Foundation's grantees, First Things magazine, you might be familiar with. I had a friend that worked there, and so she told me about the position at the Simon Foundation. So when I did some research on them, I found out that Mr. Simon himself and the foundation at large, with the staff, they had the same worldview, the same vision. So I don't get into it now, but Mr. Simon believed in the Carnegie mantra of helping people help themselves. So that's sort of where we were coming from in the magazine. So that's how I kind of felt that I should be at the foundation. It sort of worked out. So I didn't have the background necessarily in education specifically, but we're coming at the world from the same viewpoint. So that's why Sarah, my boss, hired me, and she's like, I think you're a good fit here. And so the other things you learn on the go. So it's been fun. And so this whole—
That was Kyle's principle in the last talk, by the way. Found people who were on board, right? So
yeah, some things you can teach and other things you can't. So if you got those
Recruitment matters.
Yes.
Criteria for recruitment.
Yeah, so that's how I came to be at the Simon Foundation, and that was almost 6 years ago now. And it is a wonderful place to work. Do you want me to get into who Mr. Simon was?
Yeah, in case people don't know, who was he?
So Mr. Simon, the way you may have heard of him is he was the Secretary of the Treasury under Nixon and Ford. Previous to that, he worked at Solomon Brothers. Then he did his public service time. And then when he got out of that, he started his own company, and they were sort of the pioneers of mergers and acquisitions. So he did very well for himself. And so he had a lot of money. And so in 1967, he decided to start giving it away to just sort of generally the causes that he believed in. He was a Catholic. So, Catholic charities and some medical institutions. So it was just broadly, whatever he and his wife were interested in at the time. So there was but in 1998, 99, he decided to professionalize the foundation and hire professional staff and have more of a specific vision for what the foundation would focus on, because at this point it was kind of haphazard as to what they wanted to do. So then, unfortunately, he died in 2000, sort of, did unexpectedly, I should say. But at that time, so he had 7 children, and all of them were on the board, are still on the board of the foundation. And so, and then in 2002, they had a meeting to focus the foundation and have specific priorities. So what they decided on was the 3 areas: this whole idea of help others help themselves. And Mr. Simon thought that the best way to help people was to start when they were young, before things went awry. So their focus was on youth, and he wanted to specifically help those who need it the most, and so what you call at-risk youth. So they're in inner cities mainly. So then they decided they had money, but they didn't have so much money. So they wanted to focus very locally on neighborhoods where they could affect the most change. The neighborhoods that had infrastructure already there, groups, nonprofits working, but they could just help support with the foundation's money for them to do their work. So they did kind of a sampling of the cities in nearby, New York and New Jersey, the families from New Jersey. And so they came up with South Bronx, New York, and in Jersey City, New Jersey. So we very specifically geographically focus on those two areas. So they set that, and then within that, they wanted to focus on, for these at-risk youth, education, but specifically alternatives to traditional public schools. So that could be charter schools, Catholic schools, other private schools. So that was Mr. Simon, having done time in the government. He wasn't necessarily a fan of government-run organizations. So he didn't want to support the big public schools. But specifically in these areas, in the South Bronx, in Jersey City, the public schools were not great. So he wanted to give kids that are tied into that area, that have no other options to go to these public schools, options that were safe and community-oriented and had good academics. And so that's how they started with that education piece. That's what we could talk about today. But then the other two pieces that the foundation focuses on are family strengthening organizations. So that's a number of different things. It could be mentoring programs, it could be parenting skills classes. It's just putting like a caring adult in the life of a child, or helping parents that are struggling in certain ways, raising their children or school issues. And then the third piece is faith strengthening organizations. So as we all know here, that faith plays an important part in forming a full, functioning citizen. And so Mr. Simon recognized that as well. So helping faith-based organizations, not just Catholic, to have after-school programs, summer programs that engage kids in those local neighborhoods and instill faith formation in these children. So that's everything that the Simon Foundation focuses on.
And real quick, just quick piece of context. How much, and this is all public information, how much does the foundation raise every year on average?
On average, we were about 10 million each year, but another piece that maybe isn't so interesting to you all is we're sunsetting. So that means we're closing our doors within the next 5 to 6 years. So each year we're spending a bit less. So it's no longer 10 million. Okay. We're down to maybe 9.5 now.
Gotcha. Just in terms of where things are at. Well, let's go from the general, and if we get time, we'll tell more fun stories about Mr. Simon. There's a couple good ones out there. Let's talk specifically on K-12 and within the K-12 giving, and specifically within Catholic schools. There's a couple specific investments you guys have made in New York that are noteworthy.
Yes.
Which ones can you highlight? Some of them involve in terms of creativity of funding solutions for Catholic schools. Two of them are notable. Do you want to cover those?
Sure. So there's two grantees that we have in South Bronx that just really stand out. They're doing innovative things to sort of buoy Catholic education, or buoy the whole idea of like a moral education. One of them is called Brilla College Preparatory Charter School. So this is an interesting model. It's basically, they wouldn't like me to say this, but it's a charter Catholic hybrid. So during the day, 9 to 3 or whatever it is, it's a charter school. It's a public charter school, but it's imbued very heavily with ethics and sort of a very general moral basis. During school, also I don't know if you're all familiar with, it's a blended learning school, so there's a lot of technology being used. So it's an excellent school academically, but then in the after school, and it's optional for the students, They have a faith and fun program. It's faith formation classes, basically. There's also academic tutoring during that, but it's a faith formation program, and it's in after school hours. It's not mandatory in any way, but a lot of these children simply, because we have to remember the neighborhoods that they're serving, okay? A lot of these kids, their parents are working, they're not there to pick them up at school, so a lot of their parents, whether or not they're Catholic, because most of these kids aren't Catholic, need, after school care. So so a lot of these people sign up for this program. So it's a great program. It's a great way to get around that little loophole. It's a public school, but they have this after school faith bit.
So would it be safe to say that the school during the day is lowercase c Catholic?
Yes.
So classical,
Exactly.
or at least classical inspired. And then I know that, I forget the stats, maybe you know, the after school program, which is specifically Catholic.
Right.
How many families joined the church? I think it was last Easter, the Easter before. I know the numbers are pretty staggering.
In the last 3 years, 60 children were baptized.
Wow, okay.
So that's pretty impressive, at least I think. So it's an interesting model, because the Catholic schools are struggling in these areas, because if it's not an affluent area, people can't afford the tuition and all these things. So this is their tack on trying to still give that education and give the religious education while also giving a strong academic. And it's interesting because, so Brilla, should I get into a relationship with Seton, or is it?
Well, let's come. That's probably something people have questions for. Why don't we pin that for a second? We can get into the charter school discussion if that makes sense. If that's something we want to talk about.
So the second one.
Well, actually, one other just quick follow-up. The alternative, if they didn't have that school, where would those kids like to go? Do you think?
If they didn't, the local public school, which is massively underperforming and not a safe place to be.
Is this Bronx?
This is in the South Bronx.
South Bronx. Okay. Okay. Why don't you?
They literally walk by the school to get into this school. So they see it's all the same kids that are going.
What was the building before?
It was the Archdiocese still owns it. It was a Catholic school before. The Archdiocese actually rents it out for $1 a year. So it's being repurposed sort of for Catholic.
An experiment of sorts.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, we can cover the kind of the basics of that. We can pin that and return to it if we need to. Tell us about the second one too, because that's also available in Manhattan.
Exactly. So the Partnership for Inner City Education. So that organization just came about in 2010, I believe. It was 2 organizations that merged to create an organization. One organization was focused on capital repairs in Catholic schools. Another one was on scholarship support. So they came together, and it's a big corpus, and they wanted to refocus what they were doing. How best could they serve the Catholic school population when so many of their Catholic schools were being closed and just struggling in so many different ways. So they thought they would become a management organization. So that's what they do. So they took over management from the Archdiocese of New York for 6 Catholic schools, 3 in the South Bronx and 3 in Harlem. And so they manage all of the aspects of the academics, the hiring, and just all the pieces of the management and the operations of those 3 schools. However, they're still governed by the Archdiocese, and they provide the religious education and the pastoral support. So that is another take on this. So these are obviously they're still Catholic schools. The priest and the pastor is still a part of it in religious aspects, but the principals, who mostly were lay people, there's one sister, were just overly taxed with running these schools because they're academic. They're supposed to be leaders in the academics. And the management piece, not necessarily what they're best at. So the partnership has come in and sort of taken over the finances and everything, the nitty-gritty details of the day-to-day that are not their strong suit, so that they could focus on the academics and the culture of their school. So it's actually been very interesting. We sort of got in at the beginning, and we weren't sure how it was going to go, and we weren't sure how the principals were going to feel, be like, oh, you just came and take over my school. But it's been very collaborative, and the principals love it. They buy in more than anybody else, because they just feel like so freed up to do what they were hired to do, is lead the school.
So instead of wearing 13 hats, maybe they're wearing, a handful, or primarily focusing on academics in some sense.
Right. Instead of, like, this one sister who was the principal of one of the schools, she told me, she's like, yeah, well, the hot water heater, sometimes it's like this very specific thing, you have to go hit it with this particular thing, and you have to hit it this particular way. And she was like the only one who knew this. And now they have a guy that does that, who fixes things. So it's been very helpful.
So the network took on certain tasks out of the schools, so that at the school level they could more readily handle the academic level, academic issues, better create their teams. What is it? Do you anything else come to mind in terms of what are some of the benefits of having gone on this model?
Yeah, well, there's the economies of scale. I mean, which is a big piece of it, because now they're dealing with 6 schools, right? So when they're buying textbooks, when you have to speak to vendors, you have more people, and one person can make that contract with a larger group than each individual school having to go and make these kind of decisions. So that's been extremely helpful for them.
We think that this is also a natural trend in terms of there's a number of cities that have started these building these informal networks. In some ways, they're taking from some of the lessons of the charter school movement in terms of building into small networks of schools. That's something we can also get into. A lot of the benefits there are more management, curriculum, just common sense, operational sort of things. We can get into more of that. There's this good example that this foundation is giving to in New York.
I can say that the support that they receive from the partnership. So the partnership has a chief academic officer who is a wonderful woman, Kathleen Porter-Gee, who is just so very smart. And so they have all these resources readily available to teachers, to assistants, to principals, whomever needs, like little Johnny struggling with one very particular thing. They have all these resources at their fingertips that they might not have had if they didn't have this other larger organization who's just focusing on that, providing resources for these schools. So that's also been helpful. And I've talked to teachers, and they're like, it's amazing. Their jobs are easier, and they can just focus on like interacting with the children and differentiating for each child. So.
Okay, so I don't want to call. Well, I'm going to call attention to this. So I didn't hear anywhere that you're giving directly to the archdiocese, either archdiocese. I guess it could be either side of the Hudson. Why not? And I mean, obviously, feel free to be candid amongst.
We have, since before I started at the foundation, we have not given to the Archdiocese of New York. We're in the final year of work with the Archdiocese of New York. I don't think that's probably going to continue. We don't really work with the Archdiocese, sort of just because they're such large organizations, and our approach is to work with like the smallest entity that we can affect. So we like to give directly to schools. We just find that it works better because, I mean, when you talk about like a donor and a school or, nonprofit, it's a relationship, right? So that the number one thing is this, I forgot what was I answering?
Well, why not giving to the Archdiocese?
We're not giving to the Archdiocese because the relationships aren't really there with the Archdiocese. It's such a big organization. So we'd rather, and this is when, in Newark specifically, I can speak to, we spoke with the head of the schools there. Would you rather us give to the Archdiocese, or would you rather us give directly to the schools in Jersey City? Because we only work in a very specific area. We don't work in the whole diocese at large. And she said, you know what, go ahead and work. I'm okay with you working with the schools. And we prefer that way because because this, it's a relationship, it's much easier to like know the principal at the school and be able to go on a site visit and see the kids. Working with the Archdiocese, it just, things get lost. The one grid that we had, it's just a tough, I don't want to get into specifics. It's a tough relationship.
We'll talk about your general frustrations with kind of what bugs stories in general in a second. Maybe think about this more in the opposite sense, in the positive sense. You know, when you're looking at potential Catholic school investments or education investments in general, what are some of the things you look for? Are there certain traits, certain when deciding maybe between two, what kind of what's one over the top?
Well, first they have to meet our specific priorities in the sense of it has to be in our geographic area and within our priorities. So if they met that, and it's very specific, so that weeds a lot of things out. But once we get that, I mean, I think just number one, top of everything is leadership. We invest in people that meet the principle, whatever you're talking about. We invest in people. And so all these other things that I think are important all come down to that leader. So you want someone who is innovative, someone who's accountable, someone who's results oriented, someone who will learn and change based on the information that they get. And so that's what the school will become because the leader is that. So I really think the number one thing is leadership. That is honestly what we look at.
Yeah. What sort of accountability can you guys provide that they otherwise wouldn't be receiving?
Well, here we're talking about specifically Catholic education. One of the, now I'm getting into some of the frustrations, but with finances, we're going to look at your finances. That's where we make investments in your school, and we want to see where you are and how things are going. So that's part of the deal. So we want to be able to have total like transparency, and that's been sort of one of the major issues with maybe the Archdiocese. And so that specifically in Catholic schools, that can be problematic. Finances and having people that are knowledgeable in that area specifically. Maybe you know this, but that's one of the issues there.
Yeah. So do you ever get the sense, I get the sense from a lot of grantees, specifically schools, that if something's not going right, you know, they got money for something, or they don't have necessarily all the paperwork in mind. It's almost like there's almost kind of a not a covering up, but a wanting to be as vague as possible when reporting. What is that? I mean, how do you look at things that might not, a grant that might not be going well, information that doesn't look stellar? I mean, is your read on that this is no longer a worthy grantee, or do we want to work with you?
No, we want to know about it, and the sooner the better. Don't wait until the report is due to tell us that something's going wrong. Like literally in our grant letter, we say, if anything should change, if anything should happen before the year is up, please let us know right away, and we will then change course or talk about how we want to proceed. We've gotten reports where it's like, something has happened along the way, now they're a semester behind in the project. And it's like, we would have liked to know that because we could have revised our payment schedule, or we could have helped you in some way to solve this problem. So we really would rather know ahead of time. But when things happen, sometimes for like with schools, people are talking about test scores. And so maybe you're a little like, oh, we didn't do that well this year. So you're not like bragging about it and like wanting to like send those scores out. But we want to know about it, and we want you to have analyzed that and know why this happened. That a lot of times people aren't giving the reasons, like why was there a precipitous drop in 6th grade? And it could have been because, in 6th grade, the kids leave for this public school option, and those are all your top kids. So now it looks, our scores look bad. And so maybe we need to think about a different investment, how to attract kids to stay through 8th grade, for instance. So that was just one thing that I was thinking of.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so I mentioned we were talking about this. I don't mean to, talking about like what frustrates donors. It's not meant to be a necessarily like a downer on anyone really, but partly it gets down to how, maybe the better question is how do you build a good relationship? What is a good donor grantee relationship, and kind of how does that? What's your advice for others that are maybe who haven't done this before?
Well, I mean, basically, as we were just saying, communication is, in any relationship, communication is key. Just like we'd rather know ahead of time, we want you to explain yourself. I really do think that is to keep up an ongoing dialogue, but also, on the other hand, you don't want to be bugging people. You don't want to constantly be reaching out because, as we all know, we have our own, as a foundation, we have other grantees, and we can't spend all our time working with each one. And we have time schedules, like these grantees are during this, quarter or the next quarter. It's like, if you're not in this quarter, like we don't have that time built in. We have you next quarter. So you don't want to go overboard on the communication, but with issues, be proactive about telling people. But also, on the other hand, as I was saying, you don't want to be pushy about, like expecting funding. Like, of course, if you've had a long-standing relationship, you sort of assume that funding's going to happen again. But and it likely is. But you don't want to have that sort of expectation because it doesn't come off well, and you're just like, oh, and this happens sometimes. Our foundation is by invitation only. So even if you're a grantee, we still literally send you another invitation to apply. So people, even if we've been working with for a long time, they'll just send in a proposal and be like, so excited to submit another proposal. It's like, didn't invite you in yet. We are going to, but you're just not following the process, So especially if you've been working with people, get to know their style. I mean, the foundations are different.
Every single foundation, if you've seen one foundation, you've seen one foundation.
Yeah,
everyone has a different process.
But you want to figure out how they work. And
yep.
we're very open to, like, when you first start working, let's have discussion about how that stuff works. So there's no, and that's another thing about the communication. This is how our schedule works, and this is how we like to be best communicated with. So have those conversations. I think that's fine.
Do you guys ever respond to like emergencies, like in case if someone has, something comes up? You think of the typical school situation. If there's a physical plant issue, something with, something to that effect. Is that something you ever handle or?
Yes, it's infrequent, of course, because these are kind of things that are unexpected. For one, this wasn't a school, it's an after-school program. It's a faith-based after-school program that we love. And so we only see proposals once a year, and so we had already made our grants and everything, but they have a van that they pick their children up because it's too dangerous a neighborhood for them to walk to the after-school program, and it was stolen. And so they had staff and volunteers picking kids up, and it was, taking away from their programming. And so they, found another replacement van for $10,000, and they were like, hi, can you help us get this van? And so we're like, yeah, we can. That's a perfect opportunity for you to come to us. This is not going to happen every day, but this is an opportunity for us to help you out. Yeah, sure. Definitely.
I think one of I hear a lot of donors also talk about what happens when a school, all of a sudden there's a boiler breaks, some other issue. Usually that's something they're oftentimes open to if there's an established relationship. I think the frustration comes when we haven't heard from you in over a year. It's the first time where all of a sudden you're interested in working with us, or the situation where it's because of pure neglect. To managing a facility, managing how it works. So that's something I've heard about before from a foundation's perspective. I think for the most part, donors tend not to like to fund deficits. So they don't want to pick up the slack for poor planning or for preparation. To the extent that this is another, just maybe think about it, another trend that we see. Usually donors, especially if they're going to give larger gifts, they want to know that you also have your house in order. To the greatest extent possible with, in terms of how you manage your books, how you manage your staff, if there's processes in place, it's a professionally run organization. Something like that is much easier to invest in obviously has strong leadership, as opposed to something that is a bit chaotic, a bit out of control, it's been mismanaged, that's been neglected in general. So those things always make it more appealing and ready to fund and to see as a good investment for growth.
I mean, that's part of our application is, we send out an Excel form. It's like, here's your budget, here's the project budget, here's your corporate or foundation funders, we have to send us your audit. So we go through that with a fine-tooth comb. We ask a lot of questions about it. I'm not sure how every foundation works, but I think we have a reputation sort of among grantees that we ask a lot of questions because we want to know the answers, because how we operate is we don't put anything before our board that isn't going to get accepted. We don't, some foundations, I guess, are different. They just put proposals and it gets voted up or down. We want everything to be accepted. So we ask every possible question we can imagine ahead of time so that we have to answer a suitable answer to us, so that if our board asks that question, then we've already covered that piece.
So you're anticipating what your board is what their concerns are, questions that they're gonna have.
Yeah, we think that's our job.
Yeah. So I guess that'd be a key difference when working with an individual donor or a family. They're the ones who just make the ultimate decision themselves,
right,
as opposed to a combination that has a staff that has your processes in place. You have an application process. It's not process for process sake as much as it is to make sure that the investments that are made are well researched, that they line up with the campus mission, and so on and so forth.
And we have to pay attention to who's on the board and what types of people those are. On our board, these are financial types. So yes, so they love all these programs, work with kids, but they don't know the details of like education theory and all of this. So what they're really going to look at are these budgets and these financial numbers. So we very specifically look at that stuff to make sure that it's in healthy financial shape, because specifically our board will look at it very closely.
Gotcha. Let's actually pause there. We wanted to make sure we had time for discussion, questions, specific, what's happening in philanthropy, what's happening maybe even elsewhere nationwide with Catholic schools. Happy to engage there.
Give the father some idea of how to find out who these various foundations are and what they look for.
Yep.
And therefore, if I have a particular need, so for example, to build a language lab, how would I go about finding a foundation that would be amenable to that kind of a project?
Talk to you.
You're right.
That's how you do it.
You can start by reading this. So a couple of things. One is there's actually a great resource. There's a free version and one with a small subscription called. The free one is called Foundation Center. It's a website. There's also the paid version, I believe, is what it is. It's Foundation Directory online. Same organization, and I highly suggest you figure out how to read the 990. So that is the tax document that all foundation C3s, 501c3s are going to submit to the IRS every year. Those are all publicly available. I don't suggest reading this. It's sort of like the really big foundations are hard because literally they're thousands, if not tens of thousands of pages long. Usually most foundations are within 30 to 40 pages. They will have lists of past grants. I think right now the earliest available is 2015's 990s on the website. And figure out how to do that. The subscription service allows you to search. You can search for specific grantees, programs, areas of interest. They're adding more specificity by the year. So it's not just education now. There's K-12 education. There's curriculum, private. And you can really dial in a little bit more. The other thing to do is, and some of this is just having smart development. That is, figuring out and building relationships with those folks locally, who, it's not just potential board members. It's finding out a lot of. It's funny, but a lot of people want to be asked. They're not necessarily going to show up at your door. Some might, but for the most part, if someone really has an interest in something, it means knowing your Catholics in your area, and knowing what business they're in, what sort of work they're doing, maybe even their background. Even when we work with funders, we do very significant background research so that we know that when we talk to them for the first time, we know what they're interested in, where their kids went to college, some of those things. If you know, it's even something that you don't necessarily, it's something you could ask if there's a college student who do some research for you over the summer, researching who in your area is possible. Father, your well, and then the other typical way to look for folks is who's on the boards of similar organizations. So if you have an interest in classical education, you start looking at who are the big classical education organizations around the country who might have an interest. For the most part, I don't think big national foundations are going to fund like one-off schools. So you have to think about what sort of opportunities would they be interested in. I have a saying there's not a lack of funding for Catholic education. There's a lack of good ideas. Big ideas will attract, big ideas with the leadership to implement will attract funding. So it's a matter of how can you structure something where there's a significant way to achieve something great. So for instance, I think what Mary Pat is doing with, they had the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, and now they're doing this big national, and they've just grown in the last couple of years. Their trainings went from, when I met her, it was 10 to 20 people. And now within just the last few years, they're getting hundreds of people to their seminars. I mean, they made a very strategic shift, in part by bringing her on full time to help run it. So, like, what is that value creation that you can create? So, for instance, one other effort that I've been involved with a little bit. There's a handful of Catholic high schools around the country that really have it's not just a classical focus, but it's where they really prioritize the faith. And they're not in areas that are competing. Obviously, there's issues that Catholic high schools, if they're in the same city, oftentimes they don't want to share best practices because they realize that they're competing with each other, which I think is backwards for a lot of reasons. But I digress. But then, so there's a school in Atlanta. There's one in Orange County. There's one in Denver. I think there's a handful. One from Minnesota, one from Boston. Basically, they said, let's develop an informal network. They're gonna incorporate. Actually start sharing some of the things are really benign, like accounting systems, curricula, that kind of stuff, so they can share costs across the 5 schools. When that started happening, it's wow, that's actually a really interesting idea. You're lowering costs, you're sharing information, and potentially you can create a movement that is national in scope. That's the kind of thing that donors actually would get interested in, because you're providing more value than just within the walls of your own school. So I know it's a bit of a thought exercise, but think about how can you create more value than simply doing what you've always done? How can you keep improving and growing? So
back to donors, an amazing example in the Trenton Diocese a number of years ago. Princeton Theological Seminary, Princeton University and Theological Seminary are in the boundaries of the Trenton Diocese. Princeton Theological Seminary, Presbyterian, had a massive building campaign a few years ago. Never quite understood why, because it's a dying denomination. But at any rate, they had a whole extension built for about $25 million. And the word went out that it was a single donor. And the single donor turned out to be a Catholic. Wow. Who lived on the same road as the chancery of the Diocese of Trenton. The bishop said, I never heard of this man's name even, right? So what does that say about where the antennae are, right? And then some priest went to him and said, we hear you did this. And he said, yeah, they came to me. Nobody ever asked me, right? And he was he's a Sunday Mass attendee. He was practicing Catholic, but no one knew he was off the radar screen entirely.
And there's other benefits too in terms of building those relationships. My sister's a former teacher. Right now she's raising her children. As soon as her kids are old enough, she would love to be asked by the local Catholic school to come in and teach part-time or to do something like that. My dad's business, I know he'd love to be asked to take on a few high school interns. To train them. Those are the kind of things they'd love, but of course, they're not going to pursue it. That's something I think they want to be asked. So it's not just for big donor stuff; it's for little things as well.
We're talking about the part-time teachers. My high school alma mater, when I went there was 186 kids, it's now almost 1,000. And all kinds of important people in Ocean County, New Jersey, are the graduates of that school. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, finance people, judges, and so forth. And some years ago, I said to the principal, did you ever think about inviting various alumni to be part-time teachers as volunteers? Well, that's complicating the schedule. You could get a physics teacher who is a graduate of the school, who is more than willing to go and teach a physics course 3 to 5 times a week for free. No, but we're not quite there. We can't control all of it. A little creative thinking about how to do this, right? And, or the same thing with, I'm cautious about suggesting this, but former public school teachers who have had it up to here, and there are numerous, right? And they've been 20 years in the system, and they're actually able to retire now with full benefits. And if the person has been Catholic educated herself, and very often her own children, one teacher said to me, I teach in public schools so my kids can go to Catholic schools. But at 20 years in the business, but if the person has had experience of Catholic education and is amenable to it, that you can get this teacher probably for half price and is incredibly grateful to be able to teach in a value-oriented, safe environment without any benefits even, because already has the medical benefits, already has a pension, and again, we don't think about these things. I am very cautious, though, about hiring former public school teachers who do not have the experience of Catholic education. And one diocese hired a superintendent of schools who had never been to Catholic school herself, had not sent her children to Catholic school, never taught in a Catholic school, and became the superintendent of a large diocesan system, for which she got $385,000 a year. I said, I wish that the Archbishop had asked me, I would have done it for half the price. But again, that's wrong-headed, okay? Any other?
Just another anecdote. I went to the seminary at St. Meinrad, which is a Benedictine seminary in southern Indiana. And about 6 or 7 years ago, they received a gift of $28 million. And this lady and her husband had never had any children. And they were in Chicago, and they drove by Mundelein, and it was this time of year, I think. And they stopped in the office, and somebody was around. They said, this is a beautiful place, because could there be somebody to show us around? No, we're too busy. So they went later on to St. Meinrad, the same question. And one of the monks, who was a rather gregarious fellow, took them all around. And now here we are $28 million later.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea to have someone, whether it's you or someone on your staffs that can be ready almost, at the drop of a hat to give a tour to. Yeah, I think about oftentimes it takes a number of good experiences before our families are going to choose, or a donor is going to choose to work with you. It only takes one negative one for them to just walk away. So, in general, and by the way, this is, I mentioned that we work with charter schools as well. I know the Simon Foundation does too. One of the things that they've done really, really well is that they typically have one person, and their whole job is external relations. Sometimes that's giving tours. Sometimes it's managing the grant process, helping to coach their staffs on things that would be better to have a better external appearance. Sometimes it's marketing, basic enrollment management. But I realize adding a full-time person is not always the easiest thing, to the extent that you can at least be thinking about making sure those things are done. Makes a huge difference. Can't tell you how many, and it happens
But
more.
also to get a retiree to do this kind of thing.
And or it could be grandma, right? I mean, you guys also fund the Madrinas program. To basically be that go-between. Find someone who's, whether it's a grandmother or a retiree who's passionate about the school, passionate about Catholic education. It doesn't have to be someone who's currently there. It could be a volunteer. Exactly. Other questions or any other how not to screw things up with the way this we did anymore.
Just a point, an undercurrent, I think, about all the discussions is like the simple power of personal relationships and trust, talking, building friendship and rapport. Like you can't bypass that, right? Just like from what you said, that kind of blew me away. A lot of people get it, they're just known and past. It's that simple.
And on this whole thing about face-to-face, the Italians are pretty good at this. There is an evangelical organization in Albuquerque that's involved with producing audio versions of the New Testament. I think they're up to 200 some languages that they have these. I convinced these Protestants to do the Latin Vulgate. And we presented it to Pope Benedict and so forth. But they were missing, they were not getting through to the Italian Episcopal Conference and the Vatican Publishing Division. I had suggested that we bring them to the Vatican for a trip, kind of a lay version of the ad limina visit. So I arranged with all the various Roman dicasteries to bring these people in to tell what they do. And one of them was to be at the Vatican Press. And the priest in charge was Salesian, in fact, he just retired. And they had had a complete impasse with him about getting the copyright to do the audio version of the Italian New Testament. And I had said to the priest, Father Costa, in advance in an email, I'm going to be bringing the group, would you be willing to see them? I just want to explain who they are. Oh yeah, see. And usually with an Italian says CCC, it means forget about it. But it was a real yes. And so we got to the office. We were 4 of them, Protestants, and then myself, with this Father Costa. And he brought out some little cookies and coffee and chit-chatted with them. And then I said, now, Father, there seems to have been a communications problem about this New Testament thing. And he said, well, what's the problem? And I said, well, you have said they can't do it. Oh, no c'è problema, no c'è problema. It was settled in 45 seconds. Wow. And they said, our airfare was well worth. We had been arguing and fighting about this darn thing for 4 years. But the face-to-face communication changed everything. And then he set them up to meet with the Italian Episcopal Conference that very afternoon. So the personal touch. And here's another point. We can't gainsay the value of the Roman collar in fundraising. You can send a layperson to do it, but someone who's been trained in the Catholic ethos, a collar and a veil go an awful lot longer into the conversation than sending somebody in a suit and tie. And you have to know that as part of the picture. And even the Jesuits, who are not too high on clerical guard, know when they send someone out for fundraising, he's in a collar.
Yeah. So you could therefore list retired volunteer priests.
Anything else?
Sorry, there's just the next speaker. The only other thing I would say is make sure that when someone does commit and they want to work with you, that shouldn't be the only, don't make that the last point of conversation. Make sure to invite them to events at the school. Make sure to include them in your communications. Make sure you regularly communicate with people. Every interaction with a donor, large or small, should not just be about giving. That's the kind of thing that leads to donor fatigue.
And say thank you.
This is a one-way relationship. Yeah, basic please and thank you. It goes a long way. So
put them in front of the kids that really sells it.
I have a quick question for either of you. I have one. He's a friend of our family who has a small family foundation, and he was interested in my work and said, I'd love to give to some parishes so they can hire you to help them, and it's happening. It's really beautiful. It was a very small amount of money. But what's the typical frequency to send them updates, and what's a good benchmark for frequency of communication to keep them abreast of the fruits of their donation? Do you have any advice on that?
Well, it depends on, I think one of the best ways is when you first sort of start a relationship, you can ask them, how do you best want to be
that's good.
Communicated with. So if it's, say it's email, with email, you could do as much as weekly because it's easy enough to skip it if you're not interested or whatever. you know, or, you know, if you send a mailer, that could be monthly. I think it just depends on what kind of contact you're gonna have with them.
Yeah.
But I mean, phone calls, definitely less frequently,
Sure.
because that really, you know, takes you away from your day-to-day.
Find out like the one thing that someone is really like a single point of interest. So if it's visits, prioritize the business first. If they simply want updates, be respectful of that. Sometimes if they want to come and give a talk or attend a lecture or something to that effect, more opportunities for them to be engaged, the better, because that means that they're staying in regular touch with you. So, and some of this is just basic development, but it's worth repeating and knowing what people are interested in. So, and again, that only happens if you have a good relationship with us. Some of them would want board seats, by the way, too. Don't put that out of the realm of possibility. To the extent if there's even if it's an advisory board, I think the serious people are going to want serious roles usually if they're really involved. Sometimes it'll take a couple of years to get to that point with it really bought in. So. Feel free to bug us if you have other questions or anything else we can help you.
All right, well, let's take a 15-minute break. So 3:40, and please let's observe the horarium, because otherwise we get into trouble.
The drinks are in that. The drinks are where the water was in our dining room. So if you want free drinks, the iced tea, the soda.
The other drinks are today.
Where did you say those are?
Where